In the spring of 1985, on a quiet street in Fayetteville, North Carolina, a young military family was preparing for a new beginning. Instead, they became the center of one of the most disturbing and legally complex murder cases in American history. This is the story of the Eastburn family. A story of unimaginable loss, a story of justice delayed for more than 20 years, and a story that would ultimately test the limits of science, law, and accountability. Captain Gary Eastburn was an officer in the United States Air Force. Like many military families, the Eastburns lived a life shaped by duty, relocation, and long periods of separation. Gary and his wife Catherine, known to friends as Katie, were raising 3 daughters. Kara, 5 years old, Aaron, 3 years old, and Jana, just 22 months old. They lived at 367 Summerhill Road, a quiet residential area near Fort Bragg, one of the largest military installations in the world. In early 1985, Gary Eastburn was away on a training assignment. Katie was managing the household on her own while preparing for the family's upcoming move to England. Friends described Katie as organized, devoted, and deeply protective of her children. She was careful, thoughtful, the kind of mother who paid attention to details. But one difficult decision would unknowingly place her in the path of a killer. As part of preparing for the overseas move, Katie made the painful decision to rehome the family dog, an English setter named Dixie. International pet transport was complicated, expensive, and stressful, especially with 3 small children. Katie placed an advertisement in a local military-focused paper called the Beeline Grab Brag, a common place for service members and their families to buy, sell, or rehome pets. The ad was simple: a dog in need of a new home. On May 7, 1985, someone responded. The man who answered the ad was Timothy Spencer Hennis. Hennis was 27 years old, an Army sergeant stationed at Fort Bragg. He was married, had recently become a father, and lived nearby with his wife, Angela, and their 10-week-old daughter. To neighbors and coworkers, Hennis appeared unremarkable, quiet, polite, a family man. That evening, Hennis arrived at the Eastburn home to meet Katie and see the dog. The visit appeared normal. Katie showed him Dixie. They spoke briefly. Hennis agreed to adopt the dog and took her with him when he left. According to all accounts at the time, that was the end of the interaction. But investigators would later believe it was only the beginning. After May 7th, something changed at the Eastburn home. Neighbors noticed small details at first. Newspapers left untouched at the end of the driveway. No sign of the children playing outside. No movement. Days passed. By Sunday, May 12th, concern turned into alarm. A neighbor contacted the police to request a welfare check. Officers arrived at the house and knocked. There was no answer. As they walked around the property, one officer looked through a window. Inside, a small child was visible. She was crying. Police immediately forced entry. What they found inside would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. Inside the house, officers encountered a scene of devastation. Katie Eastburn and her 2 older daughters, Kara and Aaron, were dead. Katie, just 31 years old, was found in her bedroom. Evidence indicated she had been attacked and restrained. Kara and Aaron were found in their bedroom. The youngest child, Jana, was discovered alive in her crib. She had been alone in the house for several days, without food, without water, surrounded by silence and death. She was severely dehydrated but alive. The house was sealed as a crime scene. Investigators from Fayetteville Police, the state of North Carolina, and military law enforcement converged on Summerhill Road. This was not just a homicide. This was a crime that demanded answers. Investigators began reconstructing Katie Eastburn's final days. Who had she spoken to? Who had been inside the house? Who knew she was alone with her children? One detail stood out immediately: the dog adoption. Timothy Hennis had been inside the home. He knew the layout. He knew Katie was alone. Then came a critical eyewitness account. A neighbor reported seeing a man leaving the Eastburn residence in the early morning hours of May 10th. The description matched Hennis. Investigators also discovered that Katie Eastburn's ATM card had been used after her death. The trail began to narrow. Timothy Hennis was arrested and charged with murder. In 1986, Timothy Hennis stood trial in North Carolina State Court. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial. They presented the eyewitness identification, the ATM withdrawals, evidence that Hennis had access to the home, inconsistencies in his statements. What they did not have was definitive forensic evidence. DNA testing existed in the 1980s, but it was limited, expensive, and far less reliable than today's methods. Despite this, the jury found Hennis guilty. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. For Gary Eastburn, it appeared that justice, however imperfect, had been served. But the case was far from over. In 1988, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned Hennis's conviction. The court ruled that highly prejudicial photographs had been improperly shown to the jury, potentially influencing their decision. A new trial was ordered. In 1989, Timothy Hennis was tried again. This time, the outcome was different. The jury acquitted him. Hennis walked free. Under the Constitution, he could not be tried again in state court for the same crime. The principle of double jeopardy applied. For the Eastburn family, the verdict was devastating. The man once sentenced to death was now free, and the case appeared to be closed forever. After his acquittal, Timothy Hennis returned to the Army. He continued his military career. He was promoted. He lived his life. Years turned into decades, but the Eastburn case never truly went away. Evidence remained preserved, questions remained unanswered, and science continued to advance. By the early 2000s, DNA technology had advanced dramatically. Biological evidence collected from the Eastburn crime scene was retested using modern methods. The results were definitive. Semen found in Katie Eastburn's body matched Timothy Hennis. The probability of the DNA belonging to someone else was astronomically small. For investigators, the conclusion was clear. But legally, the situation was anything but simple. Hennis had already been acquitted, or had he? At the time of the murders, Timothy Hennis was an active duty soldier. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, service members are subject to military law. Hennis had never been court-martialed for the Eastburn murders. The Army determined that it had jurisdiction. Because military courts are considered a separate sovereign from state courts, prosecuting Hennis under military law did not violate double jeopardy protections. In an unprecedented move, the Army recalled Timothy Hennis to active duty more than 20 years after the crime. He was arrested again. This time, science would speak louder than circumstantial evidence ever could. In 2010, Timothy Hennis faced a court-martial at Fort Bragg. The prosecution presented DNA evidence that had not existed during the earlier trials. Experts testified that the DNA match was conclusive. The defense had few options. In April 2010, Timothy Hennis was convicted of 3 counts of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to death for the second time. This time, the conviction stood. Today, Timothy Hennis remains on military death row at Fort Leavenworth. The Eastburn case is now studied in law schools, forensic science programs, and military justice courses around the world. It is cited as a landmark in the use of DNA evidence, a rare example of military jurisdiction overriding civilian acquittal, a reminder of how long justice can take. For Jana Eastburn, the baby who survived, the case is a part of her history, even if she cannot remember it. Her survival remains one of the most haunting aspects of the story. The Eastburn family murders are not just a true crime story. They are a story about persistence, about science catching up with the past, and about a justice system willing, eventually, to confront the truth. Some cases fade into history. This one refused to stay buried.